Hey everyone, hope your day is going well. We are back with another reaction and we're going to get into some history today, but I said I'm short for time. So we're going to check out the history of Canada explained in 10 minutes. Well, I know that's going to be impossible. As a writer, I look at it as this is going to be like a rough outline of the story, and then later you fill in the gaps. You get the most important beats, and then maybe I can go, dive a little deeper into those things that will be mentioned in this video. So if you have any recommendations for go deeper into that subject about Canada, then please let me know. We're going to start with this, and I don't know too much about it, so I'm looking forward to slowly learn a little bit more about Canada as we go. Let's jump in. Wow.
Canada.
And so much nature, and I've never actually really looked at the map. Like all these little islands too. Are there people living on there too? That's this is already probably bigger, this part here, than Belgium, where I am. Well, it's not really fair in the division. We only got a little small part. And all these lakes and stuff. Wow, man, that's so amazing. So much nature too.
Known for their delicious maple syrup,
Ooh,
and being home to nearly all of the
maple
greatest
syrup is
hockey
good.
players of all time, is the second largest nation on Earth, and with
I only know
approximately
one
2
name.
million lakes.
Wayne Gretzky. That's a famous hockey player, right? We don't really have hockey over here in Belgium.
Contains over 50%
At least
of the
not the ice
freshwater
hockey.
lakes on the planet. For many thousands of years, this region was populated with many indigenous tribes of hardy people, capable of overcoming the severe and lengthy winters, thriving and developing unique cultures. The first non-native people to settle in Canada, and the New World in general that we know of for sure, were the Vikings. They built a settlement in Newfoundland around 1000 AD. It is unclear for exactly how long this settlement was occupied for, or if there was more, but ultimately
That actually still exists? You can go visit that? That's awesome. Hey, I did that, what is it? The My Heritage or not a sponsor, by the way. Hey, guys. And I have a lot of Scandinavian DNA. That was totally unexpected, but, having a European mom, I don't think it's that uncommon. I only found that out later. But I was really surprised by it. Ooh, I got a Viking in me. There was a bad Viking ancestor in my family lineage. What did you do, mister?
it was either abandoned, pillaged, or its inhabitants succumbed to disease, or assimilated into the local population. But theories abound.
Wow.
Nearly 500 years later, in 1497, the Italian explorer Giovanni Capoto was the first European to explore North America's coast, claiming it for the English crown. Shortly after, the Spanish and the Portuguese would do the same, but remained uncolonized for several decades, with only a few seasonal Portuguese and Basque fishing outposts built, until the French arrived. Jacques Cartier claiming the land for France in 1534, he named the gulf and river after St. Lawrence's feast day on which he arrived. The French called the territory around the river Canada, after the native word for settlement. After several failed attempts at permanent settlement succumbed to starvation and disease, the cities of Quebec and Port Royal were successfully established. By 1670, the English colonies in the south had expanded, and new settlements were established in Newfoundland and south of the Hudson Bay. The fur trade, particularly in beaver pelts, became extremely lucrative, as it became the favored material for hat makers and luxury winter clothing in northern Europe. This greatly encouraged further northern settlement by both English and French fur trappers seeking to make a fortune. The French and the English did not peacefully coexist, with the French temporarily taking much of the territory around the Hudson Bay during the lengthy period known as the Beaver Wars. Not only
I'm trying to be serious here, but Beaver Wars? Depending on which website you look at, we're going to get entirely different outcomes.
only the Europeans became wealthy and influential from the trade in beaver pelts. The Iroquois Confederation of 6 powerful tribes, armed with European firearms, initially allied with Dutch merchants, and then the English, to aggressively attack the French and most other Indian tribes in the region to obtain more furs Many of
Wow.
these tribes banded together with the French to halt Iroquois expansion.
Really?
Peace was negotiated after 72 years of fighting, and many, mostly Indian lives lost. And little
Damn.
territorial change. The region of New France was comprised of several colonies. Canada and Louisiana were the largest, along with the smaller Plaisance and Acadia, which the British Empire obtained from the French in the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713 in a complicated agreement concerning the War of Spanish Succession. France also recognized the legitimacy of the Hudson Bay Company's claim over Rupert's Land. Interestingly, the Hudson Bay Company is still in existence today, primarily as owners of a retail store chain bearing their
Really?
name. Despite their larger
Man, this is so interesting. There's so many things already being said in this video that I want to get into. Uh, especially with the indigenous tribes, we hear, I at least hear growing up some of the Native American tribes, just a little bit, right? And then a little bit about the Aboriginals, but really not too much. Maybe Inuit a little bit. Oh man, history is so fascinating, man. And did he say Utrecht? Is there a Utrecht in Canada, or was he talking about the Dutch city Utrecht as well? I know there's a lot of names that were then reused in the New World, um, or bastardized versions, like Brooklyn in New York, right? Is from Breukelen, which is in the Netherlands, and all of that. So I always love hearing about the etymology of stuff too, of words, and where does it come from.
territory.
Like
The French
Canada. That's
increasingly became
interesting.
outnumbered by the rapidly growing British colonies surrounding them, by a margin of 10 to 1 by the time the next major conflict between the two occurred. During the 7 Years' War, or the French and Indian War, as it has become known in much of North America, French-speaking Acadians were deported far from the Canadian borderlands, some of whom formed the basis of much of the Cajun population of modern-day Louisiana and New Orleans. Both English and French empires sent thousands of regular infantry to North America during the war, supported by local militias and Indian tribes. The greatly outnumbered French relied heavily on Indian allies and fought the British to a standstill early in the war, until the British successfully besieged the cities of Quebec and Montreal. Despite the French later defeating the British in a pitched battle, they failed to retake their capital city. In the treaty that ended the war soon after, France ceded Canada to Britain, while giving Louisiana territory to her ally, Spain. It is important to note at this time much of North America's non-coastal areas were still largely unpopulated, with many of the native tribes heavily depleted through warfare and invasive diseases from which they had little immunity. With a population of
Man, there's some. I always wonder what would have happened if it would have be 300 years later we discovered the American continent. But of course, that's getting into territory. What if? What if? Yeah, I do like to read about it, like historical fiction, because he was mentioning uh, uh, French relying heavily upon Indians, which I think he actually means from India, right? Not the other, not the natives. Which I like to read historical fiction. Like, does anybody read the Sharp novels by Bernard Cromwell? So good. That's historical fiction, and there's a lot of that going on too. The Indians, the French, and the British going at it at each other in books. I like reading about it in books. If it's fiction, the real deal, not so much fun.
which they had little immunity. With a population of approximately 3 million, the American colonies waged a successful rebellion against the British Crown. A little over a decade later, the Americans attempted and failed to take Quebec, which remained loyal to
Really?
Great Britain. After the war, many British loyalists moved north into Canada. During the following War of 1812, both British and American armies launched several failed invasions of each other's territory, ending in military stalemate, and the status quo was maintained. The treaties following the war established a more formalized border between the two nations. Despite the Canadians' desire not to join their American neighbors to the south, movements for self-rule increasingly grew among the Canadian lower and middle classes, culminating in the rebellions of 1837 and 38 that were severely dealt with and crushed, and saw the short-lived Republic of Canada established by William Lloyd Mackenzie. Despite the Republic's short-lived lifespan and diminutive size, Widespread public support, not only from many Canadians, both French and English speaking, but also from Americans to the south, spurred Great Britain's government to make major concessions in the rebellion's aftermath. The Act of Union in 1840 united Upper and Lower Canada into the new province of Canada, and the granting of responsible government soon after allowed for a far greater degree of self-rule to be exercised by the elected representatives of the people. In 1846, the disputed Oregon Territory was peaceably divided between Great Britain and the United States, pretty much by drawing a straight line and giving Vancouver Island to Canada. Throughout the 19th century, a massive boom in the logging industry fueled large waves of immigration to Canada, gradually replacing the fur trade as Canada's most lucrative industry. In 1867, the British North America Act, or more commonly called the Constitution Act today, established Canada as a self-governing democracy with Ottawa as its capital city. To the west, the Hudson's Bay Company negotiated the sale of Rupert's Land to the newly formed Canadian government. The Métis people, of mixed European, primarily French, and Indian ancestry, were the largest population of the Winnipeg area of what is now Manitoba. Fearing the land they had held for generations would be seized by newcomers from the east, they rose in rebellion, creating a provisional government. And after a tense standoff, an eventual occupation by federal troops, many of their demands were met, respecting their rights. The leader of the rebellion, Louis Riel, would lead another larger but less successful rebellion 15 years later that ended with his trial and execution. Louis Riel became a martyr, or villain to many Canadians, his death increasing the tensions between Indian Métis, English, and French groups in society. Because of the key role the partially completed Transcontinental Railway played in the suppression of the rebellion, political support for completing it soared among English-speaking Canadians, and the railroad was completed in only 4 years from when it had begun. The 1890s.
That's amazing, that railway. I only know a little bit about it, just the tiniest sliver of it, because I reacted to the song by Gordon Lightfoot on my other channel. So again, yeah, it's slowly getting to know a little bit more about the history and some of the figures, the people that were involved, in this history, man. It's super fascinating to me, and I really have no knowledge of it. Even living in Belgium, I know a little bit about the history of of my own country where I was born and where I was brought up, but still, I don't know everything there is to know, of course. So there's always much to learn.
The Klondike Gold Rush, in which over 100,000 prospectors set out to the remote Yukon region in hopes of striking it rich. Some did, but most didn't. After several decades of stagnant population growth, largely due to emigration to the United States, Canada's population sharply increased due to a good economy and high foreign immigration throughout the early 20th century. During the First World War, Canada, still a dominion of the United Kingdom, sent 620,000 troops to fight in Europe. 67,000 would die, while another 173,000 would be wounded. The staggering casualty rate grieved and shocked the nation. The war had a strong impact on Canadian nationalism and the desire to self-govern its own international affairs, which they obtained when the British Parliament passed the Statute of Westminster in 1931, which acknowledged Canada's co-equal status with the United Kingdom. Between the world wars, Canada was hit particularly hard during the Great Depression of the early 1930s, with unemployment rates reaching 25%, and many men living in unemployment relief camps. During the Second World War, over 1.1 million Canadians served in that brutal conflict that left nearly 100,000 of them dead or wounded. In 1949, Newfoundland became the last Canadian province to incorporate. In 1965, Canada adopted its current flag. Here's a selection of some of the other national flags that were proposed.
Really? Okay, wait. Wow. I guess it's better to not have, the British flag, the Union Jack on it, right? If you really, if you really want to be independent, but it's still part of the Commonwealth, right? I don't even know what that truly means. I guess taxes, usually means something like
other
that.
National flags that were proposed. Let me know in the comments of which one do you think looks best. In 1982, what do you think? What do Canadians think? Passed the Parliament of the United Kingdom and was ratified by the Queen. granting Canada the right to create their own constitution, which they promptly did. Still recognizing the constitutional monarchy in a mostly ceremonial rule, the new constitution abolished the British Parliament's remnants of influence over Canada. Canada is now a nation of over 36 million people, where over 20% speak French as a first language, and has the 10th largest economy in the world. The province of Quebec has maintained a strong French influence over the centuries, and has on 2 occasions voted in referendums to decide whether Quebec should proclaim national sovereignty and become an independent country. In 1995, it very nearly did not pass, with secession still being an issue till this day. This has been Epimetheus. Let me know what you think down in the comments.
I
What
like this
Canadian
video.
province is your favorite to visit or live in? Don't forget to like,
No
subscribe,
idea.
and hit the bell icon to get notifications every time I make a new video. And big
No idea, man. I would love to visit Canada, but where do you start? I like cities, I like nature. But look at this. It's so big. Yo, this was interesting. So I would definitely want to learn a little bit more about some of these um, things that were mentioned, and just a little bit more about Canada and other countries too. By the way, it's a very interesting way to learn. I usually like to read and stuff, and but there's just so many things I want to do. I want to create some videos, and it's like it's like I'm double dipping, like like in Seinfeld. I'm learning and I'm making a video at the same time. It's like cheating, dude. I feel a little bit naughty by doing this, but it's a fun way, and you get to talk with some people, or or at least you can read some comments from people that have knowledge about it or live in Canada, and it's a fun way to connect as well. Yeah, man. Really, really, really interesting video, and all this expansion and territory. It's top of mind too. I don't like to get into politics too much, but it's like, yeah, what? Why is this even happening, man? If anybody should increase their territory, it's here in Belgium. We only got a little bit of patch of land. Come on, I'm gonna plant my flag just a little bit across the border. Nobody's gonna notice. Come on, it's silly, man. Just yeah. I feel it's very dismissive of the people living in Canada. Say like, hey, just we're gonna take this, or in other parts of the world where conflict is happening over territory. Yeah. Now what about the people living there? Do they get a say? No, we don't. It's wild. Yeah, it's scary too. But yeah, hey, I love you guys. Thank you for being here, and let me know, how can I expand my knowledge on this. Are there any interesting videos you would recommend about Canada to check out? Let me know. Thank you so much for being here. I truly hope you will have a wonderful day. Stay safe. Peace.